It started like any other sunny afternoon in our quiet neighborhood, kids playing outside, neighbors chatting over their fences, and the sound of a young boy practicing his violin on his front porch. But what was supposed to be a normal day quickly turned into a scene no one could have predicted. Meet Karen, the head of our HOA, known for her strict, and sometimes extreme, rules. She had complained before about noise violations, but today she took it to a shocking new level. Without warning, she stormed across the street, yelling about the music being too loud and disturbing the peace. What happened next left everyone in complete disbelief. Right there in front of the boy's family, and a growing group of stunned neighbors, Karen grabbed the violin out of the child's hands and smashed it against the porch rail. The boy burst into tears. His parents tried to stay calm, but you could feel the tension rising. Thankfully, one of our neighbors, a local musician who had seen the whole thing from his driveway, had the presence of mind to start filming. What he caught on camera didn't just capture Karen's outburst, it showed something even bigger unfolding. Moments later, flashing lights appeared at the end of the street, and things took an even more unbelievable turn. As the police car rolled up, the neighbors gathered even closer, whispering in shock. Karen stood stiffly by the porch, arms crossed, acting like she had done nothing wrong. The little boy's parents were trying to comfort him, but it was clear he was heartbroken. That violin wasn't just any instrument. It had been a special gift from his grandfather, who had taught him to love music. The local musician who had filmed everything quickly explained the situation to the officers, showing them the video evidence right there on his phone. Meanwhile, Karen kept insisting that she was enforcing HOA rules and claimed the music was ruining property values. She even tried to argue that the boy's violin playing counted as a public disturbance. The officers stayed calm, but you could tell they weren't buying it. They asked a few more questions, and with every answer Karen gave, the hole she was digging for herself got deeper. The crazy part, this wasn't even Karen's first run-in with neighbors. People started telling the officers about other times she had crossed the line, yelling at kids riding bikes, threatening to fine families for leaving Halloween decorations up too long, and even demanding someone cut down a tree because she didn't like the way it looked. But nobody expected what would happen next. As the officers kept questioning Karen, more neighbors started stepping forward, sharing their own stories. It was like a dam had finally broken. One mother told them about how Karen once threatened to report her teenage son for playing guitar in their backyard. Another neighbor said Karen had left nasty notes on their door about unsightly garden gnomes. It became clear that this wasn't just about a violin or a noise complaint. It was about years of control and intimidation. The crowd was growing, but everyone stayed calm, just quietly waiting to see what the officers would do next. The little boy's father kept holding the broken pieces of the violin, his hands shaking, trying hard not to lose his temper. His wife was hugging their son, who looked absolutely crushed. It was heartbreaking to watch. The musician neighbor, still filming, captured the quiet anger in everyone's faces, a community that had been pushed too far, finally standing together. Meanwhile, Karen, still convinced she was in the right, started arguing louder. She waved a copy of the HOA rulebook she had pulled from her purse, claiming that any unapproved noise could be subject to immediate action. The officers exchanged looks, clearly struggling to keep their cool. Every word Karen spoke just made things worse, but she couldn't seem to stop herself. Then, just when it seemed like things might settle down, another voice rang out from across the street. It was Mr. Jennings, one of the oldest residents in the neighborhood. He had always kept to himself, but now he was walking toward the scene with a worn envelope in his hand, something that would change everything. Mr. Jennings, moving slowly but with purpose, crossed the lawn while the entire street seemed to hold its breath. Everyone turned to watch him. Even the officers paused, curious about what this quiet man had to say. In his hand, the old envelope looked almost too fragile, but whatever was inside had him determined. He stopped just a few feet from Karen and the officers, cleared his throat, and said, I think it's time everyone sees what the original HOA agreement really says. Karen's face instantly changed. She tried to interrupt, waving her rulebook and shouting that Mr. Jennings was confused and that those papers are outdated. But Mr. Jennings stood firm. He explained that he was one of the founding homeowners from when the neighborhood was first built, and he had kept the original HOA documents, the ones that told a very different story about what neighbors could and couldn't do. The officers listened carefully as Mr. Jennings carefully pulled out the faded pages and pointed to a section about community activities and family rights. According to the original agreement, children were encouraged to play music and express themselves. Any attempt to silence them without due process was a violation of the HOA's own charter. Karen's mouth opened and closed like she was struggling for words, but before she could say anything, one of the officers asked Mr. Jennings if they could take a look at the documents. Karen started pacing, her face turning bright red, as neighbors whispered to each other, phones out, recording every second. The boy's father finally spoke up, his voice steady but filled with anger. He demanded to know what would be done about the damage to his son's violin. Karen, now realizing she was losing control fast, blurted out something about handling it internally, but no one was buying it. The officers, after looking over the old documents, started talking quietly among themselves. More sirens could be heard faintly in the distance, getting closer. And just when it felt like the situation couldn't get any more intense, one of the officers turned back toward Karen, hand resting near the radio clipped to his vest. The entire neighborhood stood frozen, phones aimed, hearts pounding, waiting for what was about to happen next. Just as the officer was about to speak, a black SUV pulled up fast to the curb. The door swung open, and out stepped a woman in a sharp blazer, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as an HOA district supervisor, someone higher up than Karen, someone with actual authority over the neighborhood rules. Turns out, after years of complaints piling up, the HOA board had launched a quiet investigation into Karen's leadership, and today, of all days, they had chosen to make a surprise visit. The timing couldn't have been more explosive. Karen's face drained of color as the supervisor approached. The officer backed up slightly, giving her the floor. Calm but serious, the supervisor announced that Karen had been under review for multiple abuse of power complaints, and what had just happened, caught on multiple cameras, could very well be the final straw. The neighbors, still filming, barely hid their gasps. It was suddenly very clear that this wasn't just a neighborhood argument anymore. It was something much bigger, something official. Karen tried to talk her way out of it, blaming the boy's family, blaming noise violations, blaming disrespectful neighbors. But the supervisor wasn't having any of it. She firmly asked Karen to hand over any HOA materials she had on her, including the so-called rulebook she had been waving around. The tension was unbearable now. The little boy clutched his mother's side, his broken violin still in pieces on the porch steps. Neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder, quietly united, while Karen looked more cornered by the second. The officers exchanged another quick glance, one of them reaching for handcuffs clipped to his belt. Before anything else could happen, though, Mr. Jennings spoke up again. His voice was calm but carried weight. He said there was something even worse, a discovery he had made when digging through the HOA archives, something about funds, misused fines, and decisions Karen had made that no one else had voted on. At that moment, the neighborhood wasn't just dealing with a broken violin or a bullying HOA president. It was unraveling years of hidden lies. And just when it seemed like the final blow was about to land, the supervisor pulled out her phone and made a call to someone who could take this whole thing to a level none of us ever saw coming. Everyone watched as the HOA supervisor spoke quickly into her phone, stepping a few feet away for privacy. Karen stood frozen, clutching the tattered rulebook to her chest, her eyes darting around like she was searching for a way out. The officers stayed close, clearly ready if she tried anything. The tension was so thick it felt like even the warm afternoon air had gone cold. Moments later, a second police cruiser pulled up, but this time, an officer in plain clothes stepped out. He introduced himself as a detective with the county's Financial Crimes Unit. The HOA supervisor explained that based on the evidence Mr. Jennings had uncovered, missing fines, unapproved expenses, shady payments to fake maintenance companies, there were bigger charges at play than just destroying a child's violin. Karen immediately tried to backpedal, blaming clerical errors and misunderstandings, but it was too late. The detective read her rights while one of the uniformed officers gently took the broken violin from the porch, treating it like evidence in a case. Cameras from the neighbors caught every second as Karen, once the queen of the HOA, was calmly led to the waiting car. A strange mix of relief and disbelief washed over the crowd. The little boy's parents hugged him tightly, whispering something about getting his violin repaired or maybe even buying him a brand new one. Neighbors, some of whom hadn't spoken to each other much before today, shared smiles, handshakes, and quiet promises to take back their community. It felt like a fresh start. But just when everyone thought it was all over, the supervisor made one last announcement. Because of the mishandling of HOA funds, every homeowner would be getting a refund, and not just a small one. Years' worth of wrongfully collected fines and fees would be returned. The crowd erupted in cheers, the boy laughed through his tears, and the musician neighbor captured it all, promising to turn it into a short film about standing up for what's right. As the sun began to set, and the last police car disappeared down the street, a gentle sound filled the air. Mr. Jennings, strumming an old guitar on his porch, playing a soft, peaceful tune. It was the sound of a neighborhood finally finding its voice again. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood felt completely different. Without Karen's constant threats and complaints, families felt free to enjoy their homes again. Kids played music outside, neighbors organized small get-togethers, and laughter became the new soundtrack of the street. The little boy's family started a fundraiser to repair his broken violin, but thanks to the community's support, they were able to buy him an even better one. The story of HOA Karen's downfall spread quickly online, with the musician neighbor's video gaining thousands of views, inspiring others to stand up to unfair treatment in their own communities. The HOA supervisor stayed involved, helping the neighborhood elect a new fair board that actually listened to the people living there. Mr. Jennings was even voted honorary president for the year, a small thank you for helping bring the truth to light. People often reflected on how close they had come to letting fear and silence take over, and how important it is to stand together when something isn't right. Looking back, it wasn't just about a broken violin or a noise violation. It was about protecting kindness, creativity, and the simple joys of everyday life. And that's something no rulebook should ever be able to take away.